So, Julie, at your company, Peoplehood, from what I understand at group share sessions, you typically call for everyone to answer this brief question. So, I want to start out by asking the question that you usually ask people, which is, what feels true for you today?
Okay, one thing that is true for me today is I am slightly overwhelmed. My big daughter is home from college, which has created a new dynamic in the house, having two kids back again. And my husband had a bit of a health scare over the weekend. And so just trying to process it all. And that is what is true for me today.
Thank you for your honesty. I'm sorry that you're overwhelmed. That's a lot to carry into a Monday.
But I am here and I'm happy to be talking to you. What is one thing that's true for you today, Danielle?
I love that you're doing it all with a smile. What's true for me today is that, quite honestly, I was really looking forward to this conversation. I've felt tired and uninspired lately, which is rare for me. And your ethos with Peoplehood is very connected to the work I do around questions and connection. And what is true is I was hoping to gain a little inspiration from you.
Great. Same.
Yeah.
We'll inspire each other on an almost rainy Monday.
I love that. So before we get into Peoplehood, I think for people to understand your journey, we have to start even before Soulcycle, which is when you were a talent manager in Hollywood. I did not know that part of your journey. How did that background prepare you for your entrepreneurial journey?
Definitely. I loved my career as a talent manager. I was a real theater kid. I was never that talented, but I loved productions and I loved collaboration and I loved costumes and mostly I loved musicals. And so for me, my first career was also actually a dream. And what I can say is, for every seat and for every terrible job that there is in the entertainment business, there are, tens of thousands of people that want that seat. And so it was, sort of a war of attrition to get there. And it was a war of attrition to climb the ladder in the entertainment business. And so, look, I learned a couple of very valuable things from my time in the entertainment business. The first thing that I learned was that no is never the answer. There is always a yes, and finding that yes is just about, if you're going to make it to live another day or not. And so you figure out a way. Nobody is showing up in the meeting to tell their boss that they, couldn't find the answer, couldn't get the actor to the set on time, couldn't get the copies of the script where they needed to go. There's only yes. That is it. Nobody is looking for you for no. There's a certain grit that comes with that. I mean, granted, I grew up in a different time in that business, but at the time, we didn't use words like self-care or boundary, happiness at work. We only figured out how to make it happen. We worked long days and long nights. And I will tell you that all of that for me as an entrepreneur was absolutely what paid off. It was the nights that I stayed up all night. It was the times that I felt I couldn't give up. It was the million times that people said no, that I just kept going through it. And I think that those were things that I absolutely learned in the movie business. It gave me a very thick skin and a very big work ethic. And then the last thing that I'll say is, I was a manager. I represented actors and I really had to use my imagination to figure out how to turn them into brands. Who would this person be? What would they stand for? And I think that ultimately, as I was creating Soulcycle, I really pictured her in the same way that I pictured a lot of the talent that I represented. I could absolutely hear her voice in my head. I knew what colors she would wear. I knew what she would smell like. I knew what she would feel like for other people. And I think all of those years of thinking about people as brand really helped me when I went into creating Soulcycle.
I really love that you use the word grit. I just shared this with you offline, but the first podcast that I ever listened to, now I live in the podcast space, but the first podcast I ever listened to was an interview that you did. My mom sent it to me and she wrote me a note that said she did it with grit and with heart, and you can do it too. So it's so funny that other people garner that from your journey so evidently. When you were a kid, were you that same girl, that person with confidence and grit? or did that build over time?
Well, first of all, let me just say that for me, confidence and grit are two totally separate things. I would absolutely describe myself as having the maximum amount of grit, but I don't know if I would describe myself as having the maximum amount of confidence. In fact, I will say that I have been so lucky to have an unbelievable business partner along the way. And I really do feel like she is a very confident person who trusts her gut. And she has absolutely helped me with my confidence, which has been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think a huge part of our success is that, well, we're both hard workers, but she's also extremely confident. And I think that has helped me along the way. Yeah, I think I was that way as a kid. You know, I was never the smartest kid in my class, but I always figured out a way to get myself through. I like to say, you know, I was never the biggest athlete, but I was still always captain of the team. And I think that that was just sort of always the way I've been. I'm a really enthusiastic participant. I love to work also. For me, you know, and I'm sure that we'll talk about this in our conversation as well. But for me, being part of a team, whether that's an office team or an athletic team or a theatrical production team, I love being part of a team. And for me, there's so much joy and sort of maximum effort together.
So in 2015, you and your co-founder sold Soulcycle to Equinox for a really significant amount of money. The report said that you each walked away with $90 million. Is that a correct stat?
Give or take, yes.
Give or take. Okay. So you could have done anything next. That's life-changing. And you decided to build Peoplehood. Did you take a vacation? Like, why did you want to build something instead of just kind of enjoy your time?
My God, my vacation was I went to WeWork and became their chief brand officer for 2 years.
Oh my God.
That was some kind of vacation, let me tell you. But also, by the way, another incredible experience. You know, I went to WeWork at a very interesting time. I will say I worked with some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with. It was once in a generation type of rocket ship. You know, we had just been really funded and we were scaling, internationally at an incredible rate. I worked with very, very gifted people from all different industries. And I will say for me, going to WeWork was sort of actually relaxing, even though I worked very hard because I was working for somebody else's vision, which was different. And I think scaling internationally, which was not something I had done with Soulcycle, really helped me. I like to say it gave me peripheral vision. Creating something in New York and thinking about how people would respond to it in China was not something I'd ever done before. And I really appreciated that experience. I love to work and I also love to learn. And so for me, it was a learning experience. I was a grown-up. I had a thick skin. And so the craziness of WeWork and that time didn't really get me down. And so it was actually okay. And then I took not too long before Elizabeth and I started Peoplehood, which was always in the back of my head, even as I'd left Soulcycle. But I was waiting for Elizabeth, who took a brief break. She had some family stuff to deal with. And again, I think like we were talking about, I think for me, there's so much joy in collaborating and creating. Elizabeth and I tend to create things that we need in the world. We are absolutely the users of what we create. And what we learned during our time at Soulcycle was really that people thought they were coming for the exercise. They thought they were coming to lose a little weight or get into better cardiovascular shape. But what they were really coming back for was each other, for the way that they felt supported in those rooms, for the communities that they built, for the connections that they were fostering. And I think that we really began to understand that in a post-COVID digital overuse era, those skills, those communities, those opportunities are really being stripped out of our society. And for us, they really are the foundation of, everything that we do. And so kind of using the things that we've learned along the way to build a product or an experience that can help people practice to exercise those muscles of community, those muscles of listening, those muscles of connection. How do we build social wealth is really what we're talking about. And so for us, it's been a labor of love. And still is. I mean, it's a really new concept for people. Once again, we are trying to build a category, which is it's layered. It's not just building a great product. When you have to build a whole category to then put your product into, it's a whole other ball game. But we're doing it and we're loving it. And it's been really interesting so far.
It's also philosophical rather than like you're presenting a whole new idea to people, which is really difficult and exciting.
Both. Yes, both.
Yeah.
I think that thank goodness, when we started Soulcycle almost 20 years ago now, right? People were just beginning to understand that you could really exercise to improve your physical health. I mean, exercise as lifestyle. I like to say, I take you back to a time when Soulcycle was starting and there was no Instagram. There were no Lululemon stores in New York. And so exercise was really something that you did on your to-do list. You burned your calories. Your doctor said you were doing good. And then you moved on. There was no joy from it. There was no community. There was no style. There was no street cred. There was just like a thing on your to-do list that was pretty miserable. So kind of introducing this whole idea of exercise as lifestyle was very new. Thankfully, in the past 2 decades, we've really seen, kind of as a result of building that whole category, wellness come up as lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Now we're aware of our sleep. We're aware of our nutrition. Thankfully, we're really becoming aware of our mental health. And I do think social health is right behind that. If you look at what our Surgeon General is interested in, if you look at any of the headlines, I think that we are just beginning to come into a time where we really begin to consider how our relationships with other people are really affecting our physical health.
I'm right there with you. I think the Surgeon General says that loneliness is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
100%. And ironically, when you look at any medical report, you listen to, whether you're listening to Peter Attia or, you're listening to our Surgeon General, everybody tells you that the number one predictor of a healthy life is the relationships that you're in, who you love, who loves you, if you feel like you matter, if somebody checks on you every day. And yet our habitual practices are falling very short of that. We know that we need it in the same way that we know we need green vegetables, but we'd rather eat French fries. We know we need to speak to other people. We know we need to practice being in relationships. We know we need to reach out to other human beings. And yet we are still not making the time to do that. But I do think there's going to be a shift in that, because I don't really think that we can go on this way. I think that people are actually getting bored of their phones. I think we're reaching the end of the scroll at this point.
I like that.
I know for me, there's just a certain point where I just can't look at it anymore. And so it's interesting, when my 13-year-old comes in and tells me like, I'm bored of my phone, that we are going to get to a place pretty soon where we're going to have to go back to looking at each other.
So I read that Peoplehood came out of a mistake of yours, which I thought was sort of interesting that you called it a mistake. Can you share that story?
Definitely. Look, it's no secret that I could be a real workaholic. I always say that I've been super lucky because there are, 3 people in my life that have forced me to not work all day and night. And that is my husband and my 2 daughters. I think when you become accountable to a family, it's a force mechanism for a workaholic. So it's actually really great. But I will tell you that, look, Soulcycle was a real joy. I mean, Elizabeth and I loved going to work every day. That community was our family, our fun, our social life, our work life. It was all of it. And so as the business was starting to succeed, we just worked more and more and more. And there were a couple of things that happened during that time. First of all, I had a brand new baby. I had a fairly new marriage. And I think my thought was, like everybody's thought is, that, at work, you have to dedicate time and discipline to learning things, but at home, everything will just work out. And I think that's a really funny, juxtaposition of the way you look at things, when actually your home life and your emotional life and the people that you love are sort of the most important thing. And yet you actually spend the least amount of time working on those relationships, dedicating time to that, when at work, Think about it. You'll take a meeting with almost anybody that emails you and asks for your time. You may never see them again, know them again. They have actually no impact on even your business life. And yet you will focus on them for an hour. And so my husband, who is extremely evolved, was seeing a therapist at the time. And he came to me one day and said, my therapist recommended this book for us. And she said that if you like it, we should go and maybe take the workshop. And it was a book by Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt, and it was called Getting the Love You Want. And it was all about the practice of imago therapy. And I read it and I thought, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And really what that practice is all about is learning to listen to each other different. Is now a good time for me to have a conversation with you about? And that means I get your full attention. And I tell you what I'm thinking. When you work all day, it makes me feel like I'm less important than what's going on in your office. And then I just repeat back to you. So what I'm hearing you say is, when I work all day, it makes you feel less important. Did I get all that? And then you go back and forth until finally you get to the point where somebody says to you, yeah, because I really enjoy my time with you. And when you don't spend time with me, it really makes me feel not loved, right? Or whatever the answer is. But you sort of go down this rabbit hole and you learn to communicate until you get to a place of empathy rather than conflict. And think about it. Especially with the people we love, we want to understand them. We want to reach empathy. And so my husband and I went to those seminars, and we went over and over again, and we went for many, many years, and we still practice that very much. And I will tell you, it's changed the entire way that we are married. We don't react to each other anymore. Nobody snaps when somebody says, well, I'm doing more of this, or how come you loaded the dishwasher wrong? The reaction now, and if somebody does, we can almost make a joke of it, because it's like we understand the bad behavior. I loaded the dishwasher wrong. Got it. So what I'm hearing you say is that when I load the dishwasher like that, it makes you feel frustrated. Not, what? I loaded the dishwasher wrong? Well, you know what? I ordered all the groceries and picked up the rest of the house. So it's okay. You can re-put the plates in, right? I mean, that would normally be the reaction. Right? I'll tell you what I did because you're telling me what you don't like. So that was the first one. Spencer and I really began to communicate in an entirely different language. And I think that, to this day, it's something that we've really practiced. And then Elizabeth and I also found an amazing corporate coach, because we learned pretty early on that a partnership is not easy to navigate. Two people that want a successful business that are also living separate lives and have different financial, emotional, time needs. So we found a coach. And we also learned how to listen to each other differently. Elizabeth and I have meetings in two parts. And when we have a big decision to make, first we go into a meeting and I present my side and she presents her side. And you can tell we all want different things and it's very heated. And then we go home. And then we have another meeting 2 days later. And that's when we make an actual decision. And normally we've actually switched sides when we come back. Right?
Love this technique.
Because I've seen it your way and you've seen it my way. And I've had time for my ego to go away. And I've had time to process. And you know what? Actually, I think more than keeping our partnership healthy, I actually think it is what has made our businesses very successful, because you go into things with such an ego, and winning is so important because down deep inside, like I told you, none of us are so confident. We're all insecure. We all want to win. We all want to be right. When the truth is that's not always the best decision. And so learning these techniques, learning how to listen, learning how to go from ego to empathy has really changed the entire trajectory of my life. And I will say that it is something that has taken me a long time to learn, but something that I would really say probably the most valuable skill of my life.
So many great things break down because of a lack of communication. I see that. I'm in production. I see that on shows all the time. And there's such easy fixes, which is why one of the reasons your company is, I think it's actually revolutionary. I'm so excited to see the impact that you make with this. I think everyone thinks they're a good listener and they're not. And that's one of the funny things. Most of us are walking around not feeling heard. And we have this frustration all day. And then we come home and we eat, or we just let it out on something it's not the right place to let it out. I like the idea of breaking these bad habits. Are there some that come up for you that are sort of flags that can help us notice that we're not listening?
Definitely. Look, the number one that we are all guilty of is being on our phone while we're talking to other people. I mean, there's nobody walking around this planet that has a phone that is not guilty of that. And if that does not say to somebody, I don't really care about you, I don't know what does. And I do it all the time. I mean, we all do it all the time. My kid is telling me about their day, and I'm also, making the next doctor's appointment or doing whatever else. It's terrible. I mean, it's actually a terrible lack of respect for another human being. And I will say that is the number one thing that I can say. The next thing is, we're listening, but we're already forming our answer in our head, right? So I'm not really listening to you. I'm going to tell you about my experience. I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to give you my advice, or I'm going to give you judgment on that. I mean, that is not listening. So at Peoplehood, it's so interesting, right? So Peoplehood, it's a 1-hour experience. We either do it on a screen, we do have a digital platform, or we all come into a room. It's 15 to 20 people. In the room, it's in a circle. On the screen, it's in boxes. But the truth is that we are all sitting there. We do some group sharing. We do some breath work. And then we go into one-on-one breakout groups. And what do we do in the groups? I mean, you talk for 3 minutes and I listen. I talk for 3 minutes and you listen. And people sort of look at me the first time they do it and they go, we're just going to listen. I say, yeah, we're just going to listen. That's all we're going to do. It's literally like saying to somebody, we're just going to walk. Yeah. We're just going to run. You know what? Once you get to running for over a mile, you feel pretty tired, or it feels pretty challenging. Maybe it feels that way after 2 blocks. Guess what? After you listen for 15 seconds with a clear mind, it's pretty hard. And you begin to realize, oh gosh, I really don't listen. I'm doing a laundry list. I'm going to tell this person a story. And it's so simple. It's like any other muscle. If we just practice, it's funny, this morning in my gym, I was doing a plank, right? And I got to whatever seconds, 40 seconds. And I thought, if I could just, but like anything, you're just building your stamina. If I can do it for 50 seconds next time, a minute the time after. And it's the same thing with listening. And it is, honestly, you use the word revolutionary. It is revolutionary. I now at my dinner table with my kid, they will start to tell me about their day rather than immediately dive in and say, well, why didn't you do well on that test? Didn't you have 3 days to prepare? I just listen. I listen to them tell the whole story about why the test was unfair, why even though they had the notes 3 days in advance, they weren't prepared for it. And you know what happens? Usually that person solves their own issue, or they get to a place where they have a self-realization about what they could have done differently, or they find their way to some sort of discovery and they got there on their own and it was more valuable than if I told them what to do, and they felt like I supported them in the decision. And micro changes like that, if I do that every night at a dinner table, what does my relationship with my kid look like just 1 week later? If I did that 5 times in a row, if I did that in an office meeting, just listened to a coworker's idea without saying, you know what, we're not going to do it that way. Here's my way. If I just listened to the whole idea, what happens after I listen to that idea 5 times? I am in a new position with a human being. And that is wild.
After every interview that Oprah did, she said, no matter who it was with, Beyonce, Obama, they would go to commercial break and they would look at her and they would say, was that okay? Like, everybody just wants to know that they're okay, that they were heard, that they were seen. And she was like, that was the through line of my work, is everyone just wanted to be heard and seen, which is exactly what you're doing. It's so interesting to me that we don't learn how to do this. I had to learn through my work.
And it seems so simple. And that's also why I really do think this is a very new category, because people think we just know how.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do. And I actually think we're unlearning every day, especially with the amount of technology that we're using. And with, I don't know how you feel about it, but I can tell you my behavior is really different post-COVID.
Interesting. Say more.
My social tolerance for being out 5 nights in a row doesn't happen anymore. I've got 1 or 2 nights a week in me to really be at my social best. And then I just need to, bring it down. I just don't have that kind of social stamina that I used to have.
Yeah, I understand that. I have always been a person that needs to recharge alone. So I feel like it got worse with COVID. But it's part of, actually, you talk about this concept of higher listening, which I want to chat with you about, because I think that's actually part of my stamina, is I really feel like I'm listening. And so I don't want to be places and talk if I can't have that. Can you share about higher listening?
Sure. So at Peoplehood, we just define higher listening as listening without giving advice, adding your own opinion, judgment, or tacking on your own story, an oh my gosh, me too, right? So it is simply listening with your full body, with your full attention, with an empty, clear mind, listening just to really hear and understand somebody else's point of view. So if I'm listening to your story and let's say, last round of the playoffs, you were a 76ers fan, which I know you aren't because I like you already. But let's say you and I, right? I'm listening to you talk about why you love the team from Philadelphia without my own judgment, without my own opinion. I'm really just listening to you say, when I grew up in Philadelphia, this team really mattered to me. This is what they meant, right? And my mind is just clear. I am just absorbing your point of view. I am putting myself in your shoes. Because when I put myself in your shoes and we're both just human beings, I find a place of empathy and understanding for you. We connect in a different way.
Yeah, I think so too, Julie. There's so many studies. We spoke briefly about the Surgeon General, but there's this overall concern for our social and interpersonal health. Have you found certain tactics to improve or create new relational habits?
So for me, believe it or not, the number one thing that has improved my relational habits actually in the last decade and a half, believe it or not, has been having Shabbat on Friday night with my family.
Really?
Yes. And I will tell you why. And it does not have to be a religious thing for anybody that's listening. You can dedicate any night of the week, one night of the week, to doing something like this. But about 10 or maybe more years ago, I was actually out to lunch with another female CEO, and she got up sort of as we were paying our check and said she had to rush out of there because she goes home early on Fridays to set up Shabbat. And I thought, wow, she's so much more important than me. Like if she can make this happen, I can definitely put this on Friday night. And, in my house, I require very little of my children. Don't always have dinner together, busy working mom, 2 New York City kids. But I decided that the one thing I was going to require from my kids was we all show up at the table at 6:30 on Friday night. They can bring any friends, we never have a table that's completely Jewish. It's Jewish people, non-Jewish people, anybody. Their job is to put away their phones. They can choose whatever they want to eat for dinner. There's always tons of dessert to bribe everybody to stay at the table longer. But there is something about lighting the candles at 6:30 and sitting there for a long dinner until the candles are done that absolutely changes. Like it's a totally different expectation that we all come to the table with. A lot of times all the grandparents are there. There's always lots of people, an interesting conversation. And there's just this expectation that we're going to be at the table for 3.5, 4 hours, just talking and eating. And it has set a tone for our weekend and the end of our weeks and changes the dynamic of our family every single week in a way that I have to say has really changed the foundation of our family's interaction. Just that one night a week of putting our phones away and putting this expectation out there that we're just going to linger. And I would say that practice has been really big for us. I wish I did more, but that's just about what we can manage.
Well, I think you're actually talking about your own version of peoplehood. You're creating a container and a moment that people can rely on where they know what's going to happen. It's about connection. And
I will also say that the people that I've invited to my table over the years,
yeah,
they've really grown with me. Those are the conversations over the last 10 years with friends, with my parents, with colleagues that I actually feel like have made us closer, and we've connected in a different way and have really put sort of a lot of money in the bank as we've grown over the years. That slow time with people around these tables, I would say, has really been fuel for growing a lot of these relationships.
I love that. I've never heard anyone say slow time. I love that.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. You guys have tapped so many different leaders. You've tapped scientists, researchers, therapists, rabbis, authors. How have having all of those voices shaped this space uniquely?
I think it's so interesting, right? Because everybody needs to understand this in a different way. So when you look at scientists, right, they're going to explain to you kind of how you are affecting the brain, how you are slowing down your mind, how you're reducing cortisol production, how you're releasing oxytocin when you connect with another person, how it's a real dopamine hit for your brain. And then, of course, there's the aspect of dealing with a rabbi or a spiritual leader. And what is really any religion about, right? It's about being a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And when we connect with just one other human being, or we feel part of a community, there is that feeling of, wow, I belong to something bigger. And when we are able to step out of our own concerns, our own worries, our own small sort of, one perspective on life, I think that also it connects us to something really different as well. Amazing authors and experts that we've worked with that have really helped direct us toward, what different types of connection, different techniques look like with a child as opposed to a colleague, as opposed to a spouse. I feel like what we've tried to do with the 1 hour Peoplehood experience is take like the greatest hits of all of these things. I mean, we've worked with AA leaders, and that's also fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about rooms of people that are only rooting for each other, no judgment, people just hoping as hard for the person next to them as for themselves that they get to tomorrow, right? And that is such a profound and beautiful thing, to just hope that the person next to you wakes up tomorrow morning, right? That is wild. And so when we think about putting all of these things together, and it's the greatest hits of humanity, I mean, what an awesome thing to think about. And how can we do that in a way that we can make it accessible for people, right? I keep saying it's Soulcycle for your relational health, right? You hop in, you connect to other people, you practice listening, you buy a sweatshirt, you grab a latte, and you're out, right? It's fun, it's easy. And so we've really tried to also make it that way. Music, charismatic leaders, how can we make this easy for people? I mean, we're competing with Netflix, right? People are lazy. We're all competing for people's time. So how do I make this as fun as possible so that you leave feeling high and you want to keep working on this?
You keep using the word practice, which I really love, because I've noticed that with questions. People are nervous to ask questions. It can be awkward or uncomfortable, but the more practiced you are, even if you ask yourself questions or you practice with the people closest to you, like your mom, where you feel comfortable, the better you get at asking questions. And I think it totally changes the quality of our conversation. So the idea that you can practice being a listener is fascinating.
Well, that's the truth. I like to say that if you come to Peoplehood one time, you're going to have an aha moment. You're going to get it because it's simple. The first time that you bite your tongue and really understand listening differently, listening really becomes three-dimensional. You can't believe it, but very quickly you can feel it everywhere and you go, oh, this is not something I've ever done before. Mm-hmm. So you'll have an aha moment. That will happen. I can guarantee that. Money back if it doesn't. I'm happy. I'm right here. You can email me if you come to Peoplehood and you don't get tingles, but you will. You'll feel a real aha moment. That is very nice. But as we all know, one carrot is not going to change our diet. One therapy session is not going to help us understand ourselves in the way that we need to move forward. One pre-med course is not going to make us a surgeon. All of those things, right? And so like anything else, listening is a practice. Being in a relationship is a practice. All of those things. And when we begin to frame it that way, when we begin to understand that we are exercising specific muscles in the same way we do to achieve anything else in our lives, we can integrate this into our lives in a way that we can really begin to create lasting change.
In the spirit of your promise of aha moments, is there a conversation that you've had or a moment where you've really listened in a attentive way that you think has sort of shifted your life? I know you mentioned something with your marriage and also your business partner, but if there's even like one conversation or moment you can point to, I'd love to hear it.
What's interesting, I have one daughter who is, she is my mini me. I would like to say, we walk down the street and people will say, like, I can't believe the two of you can look so much alike or be so much alike or whatever. But I think also because we are so much alike, because we sort of mind read each other. And I would say 9 out of 10 times we're thinking the same thing, eating the same thing, doing the same thing. I think sometimes in our long relationship, I've overestimated that I just understand how she feels. And so I probably a lot of times don't listen to her very well, because actually, very interesting. A lot of times there are therapists that say we actually listen the worst to the people that we know the best, because we assume that we know what they're going to say. And I remember having one very specific conversation with her where she said to me, "You don't know what I'm thinking. You don't understand the way that I'm feeling a lot of the time." And I'm not remembering exactly what it was around at that moment, what triggered that conversation. But I remember really stepping back and thinking, gosh, like,
yeah,
I need to give this child her own identity, because I think in my own sort of ego or love for the fact that I have produced this person that's so much like me, and that I have this sort of, sidekick and whatever, I think I was not giving her the space that I needed for her to be able to express her own feelings with me. And how could I really be the type of mother, friend, person that she needs if I'm just assuming that same, me too, same, right? That's not the way she wanted to be in a relationship with me. And I think that conversation really gave me great pause. And I have to work even harder, actually, to step back with her. I would say she's the person that most in my life, I think I know what she's going to say. And I have to really, bite my own tongue and take a step back before I engage in the answer or the comeback with her.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think everyone can identify with a person in their life that, whether it's, you said you're similar to her. I immediately thought about my own mom. We are we're opposites. And so she triggers me a lot, and I have to really work to listen and to get over that frustration, which is my first instinct. And so I appreciate that reminder.
I have a daughter like that too.
Is she like your husband?
Very much. Very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to do a little rapid fire with you, Julie. Who is the best conversationalist that you know?
My husband.
Who is the best listener that you know?
My husband.
Did you fall in love with him because he was a great conversationalist?
I fell in love with his sense of humor, to be honest with you.
Yeah. What's your go-to comfort movie?
Devil Wears Prada.
What is a fear that you have yet to conquer?
Well, here we go. Have you not read all the crazy things about me that I do not take elevators?
No.
I am a wild claustrophobic. I don't take elevators at all. I will climb to the top of 30 Rock, 71 flights if I need to get up there for a fancy occasion. But I don't take an elevator, and I have not conquered it yet.
That is why you are in such good shape. It's not terrible.
It's sort of embarrassing, but okay.
No, I don't feel that way at all. I'm sorry you feel that way. I think you made it work for you.
Ish.
What is a business decision that you wish you could do all over again?
Meet Elizabeth Cutler.
Why?
Because she is the best business decision I've ever made. That partnership is the legacy of my life. Being her business partner has been the joy of my work career.
That is so rare that you hear that from somebody. That's really cool. When is the last time that you cried?
Rewatching The Intern.
Yeah, it's such a good movie. What is a book that changed your life? Something you think everybody should read?
Maybe The Alchemist.
It's on my shelf and I have yet to read it.
Oh, it's so good. I'm such a control freak, and it just makes you realize that, it's all the way it's supposed to be. You can try to control everything, but it all starts and ends where it's supposed to.
I have a card game of 52 questions for deeper conversation. So I ask one every week. So because we're virtual, please tell me when to stop.
Stop now.
Okay. Ooh, a lyric, poem, or mantra that you hold on to tightly.
Well, I have a mantra on my computer. It's on every computer. I put a Post-it note. And I always say, high road, long view. And I think in business sometimes, whether it's with competition or a bad negotiation or an employee that is, unhappy or whatever the situation is, I think sometimes our tendency is to, sink down to the level, measure ourselves against the competition, act out or do things that are not the most graceful. And I have been in challenging business situations, and somebody once said to me, high road, long view. So in other words, you take the high road, you do you, be the best version of yourself you can be. And in the end, you'll get where you're supposed to go in a much more graceful way. And I really think about that in life and in business and all of the things, high road, long view.
When those moments come up for you, Do you have something that you go to? Like, do you breathe? Do you see a therapist? What's your mode of like refresh?
Well, first of all, let me say that I've gotten a bit older. And I just also think with time, you really begin to get a bit more perspective. I think that, it's very hard to tell somebody who, the 35-year-old version of me that was in, killer startup mode. It was a lot, or even, by the way, the 25-year-old version of me that was negotiating actors' contracts with somebody that I didn't feel was treating me fairly. I can really think back about times when I spoke to people or acted in a way that I can almost make myself cringe thinking about how I'm not proud of that. And so as you get older, I think, you begin to understand legacy a bit more. You begin to understand, that the way that you walk around in the world is more important than winning or losing right now. And so for me, I try to back away from something. I try to take a walk. I try to, my mom used to say to me as a little girl, don't make decisions late in the day or at night. It's not your best thinking. Wait until the morning. And sometimes I just try to have a sleep on it. I really try to bite my tongue, which is very hard. It's not my best MO. I'm the kind of person that if I buy your birthday gift too early, I give it to you then, and then I have to buy you something else for your birthday. I'm bad at surprises. I'm bad at waiting. I'm bad at taking a pause. And so, but I do try. I really try to take a pause.
And what's the smartest decision you've ever made?
100% to marry my husband.
Where'd you guys meet?
We met in Los Angeles in the movie business.
Oh my God. Okay, my fingers are crossed. It can happen.
Oh, it can definitely happen when you're very least expecting it. Very least expecting
it. Julie, thank you for your time. I know you have a lot of people pulling at you. This meant a lot to me.
It was great. It was great.